Welcome to this WiseOwl tutorial giving a full case study of using Power Query to load data into Excel. Here's what you'll learn in the tutorial. We'll begin with a look at what the aims of the case study are, before getting the initial data, in this case from an Excel workbook. We'll look at creating some initial transforms just to get the data in the right format, and then look at splitting columns in two and then merging them back together again. We'll then go on to look at creating custom columns using the built-in query language. We'll look at indexing rows to allow you to sort data more easily. And finally, we'll look at using the group and pivot transforms to group and pivot data respectively. So let's get started. Before we actually create the Power Query, let's have a look at what we're trying to achieve. On the WiseOwl website, we have for each course a list of all the scheduled dates. And if I click on that button, you can see it gives me the list, in this case for Excel VBA. I'm writing this sometime in April 2015, so all of these dates will probably be long gone by the time you come to view this tutorial. If you're wondering why the obsession with the WiseOwl website, by the way, it's simply because that's what I'm most familiar with, and this is a nice little table to use as an example. Now what I've done is created an Excel file for this to make sure that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet. I'm not quite sure if that expression travels across from the UK, but it means that everyone's doing the same thing. What we're going to do is import only these two columns. We're going to just look at the London data, which I've shaded here. And above all, we're going to sort out the dates. They're in pretty strange formats, and what we need to do is make sure that for each we get the start and the end date of the course. And if all goes well, and I'm hoping it will, the end result will be a loaded data sheet giving the row number, the number of days of each course, and when it began and finished. And as a pièce de résistance, if that all works okay, I might show how to do grouping and how to do pivoting within a transform within Power Query at the end. So that's where we're aiming. Let's get started with actually importing our data using Power Query. So what we're going to do now is to find the data which we're going to play about with for this example. And to do that, as often, we go to the WiseOwl website, www.wiseowl.co.uk, click on Resources, go to Blogs. The blogs are categorized if you go to the Microsoft Office category. Within that, if you go to the Power BI Excel 2013 subtopic, and somewhere within the list which appears, you'll see a blog saying useful links and downloads for our video tutorials on Power BI. And if you scroll down this, you'll see there's a link to the Excel VBA course list. But what I recommend if you're following this tutorial is instead to download the Excel workbook, which gives the up-to-date information at the time the tutorial was made. So if I click on that, I can now download the file, so I can choose Save File. And what it will do is create a zip file on my hard disk. What I can then do is to find that zip file. You can see I've got a previous copy already, and I can double click on it to extract the data. If I then click on Extract All Files, I can choose the folder to export it to. I'm going to put it in a D1 folder, and you can see that it's created the Excel file. The instructions I've just given are for Windows 7, but I'm sure they'll be similar for later versions of Windows, and who knows, it might even work on an Apple Mac. If I then double click on that file, you can see it will load it into Excel. It says, be careful, files from the internet can contain viruses. WiseOwl ones don't. So you can click on Enable Editing, Enable Content To, and this is the data which I'm going to import. So what I'll do now is to close down that file, and I'm good to go with Power Query. And I can start creating my Power Query to import the data. So to do that, the first thing I can do is choose where I'm getting my data from. It's from a file. I can choose from Excel. I can go to the folder I created and double click on the file I want to import. And what it will do is load up all the tables it finds within that Excel workbook. There's only one of them, and it's called VBA Courses. And I can double click on that and go into editing my Power Query. And the rest of this tutorial will show how to massage this data into the format in which I want it so that I can load it into Excel. So the first thing we're going to do is just do a bit of tidying up. 3 or 4 simple transforms before we get into the meat of the tutorial. The first thing I'm going to do is to make sure that these first columns, or first row rather, of column headings appears at the top of my list. And to do that, I can double click on my query to edit it if you haven't already done so, and I can click on Use First Row as Headers. The second thing I'm going to do is filter the data just to show the London courses. And I can do that by clicking on the drop arrow next to the column I would wish to filter by, and there's all the usual text filters available to me. In this case, what I want to do is just pick out the London courses, so I can tick the London box and choose OK, and it will save that and create a transform called Filtered Rows. And it would probably be a good idea now to rename that and call it something better, like London Courses, to remind myself what that step is actually doing. The third thing I'm going to do is choose just the second and the third column. And to do that, I can select those two columns and I can choose Remove Other Columns. You need to be careful here. It's not those two columns you want to remove, it's everything but those two columns. And I'm left with just the start date and the days. And finally, in this short section on tidying the data up, I'm just going to reorder the columns. I'm going to put the days first. And I can do that by clicking on the column heading and dragging it to where I want it to go. So that's prepared my data. What I now need to do is get into the serious business of tidying up these dates. So what we're going to do to extract the date from the start date we've been given is use 2 or 3 split column transforms to get at the information. I'm not incidentally claiming this is the most efficient way to do it, but it is a way which illustrates how Power Query works best. So the first thing we'll do is click on the split column transform and choose by number of characters. And what I'm going to do is type in the number 4 in there. So my thought is, what I'll do is strip out the first 4 characters, which always gives the name or abbreviation for the start day of the course, THU in this case, and a /. I only want to do this once on the left hand side. I don't want to repeatedly slice things up into 4 character strings, which is what would happen if I were to choose repeatedly. So I'll choose OK for that. And what it will do is split it into 2 parts, and as will often be the case throughout this session, I'm not really interested in the start date one at all, so I'll remove that. It's tempting to rename the date to something more sensible, but this is only a temporary staging column, so I'll leave it as it is. The next thing I'll do is split the column again, but this time using a delimiter. And the delimiter I'm going to use is a /, which isn't present in this drop list. So what I can do instead is choose Custom and type in the /, and again I want to choose the leftmost delimiter only. And what that will do is leave all of the columns unaffected apart from this one, the first one, where it will split the date into the 2 parts and leave me with the 1st of May 2015. If I choose OK for that, you can see I split it into 2 columns. At some stage in the near future I'm going to have to recombine these. What I can then do is take this first column and add another split column transform, again choose a delimiter, but this time I'm going to delimit it by a dash. And again you can see what this will do is extract just the final date portion. Again I wanted the leftmost delimiter, although it wouldn't make any difference which I chose because there's only 1 dash in each case. And I can choose OK to split that up. Once more I'm left with a little stub here, which I don't want, so what I'm going to do is delete that. And I'm left with 2 dates. The problem is this second one won't work as a date. You can see that because if I try to change it into a date, it will give me an error. So what I'm going to do is just delete what I've just done. And instead, what I'll have to do is replace some values. And what I'm going to do is replace every occurrence of ST with nothing. And what that will do is change the 1st of May 2015 to 1 space May space 2015. And if I was doing this properly, I would have to do another one to replace every occurrence of RD for 3rd and every occurrence of TH for 4th, so that I cleared up all the data. But I'm going to be lazy and not do the other replacements. So I've now got 2 columns, each containing dates in text format, and what I need to do now is to merge them together. And I'll do that in the next part of this tutorial. So what I need to do now is to merge the 2 columns into one, and to do that I can use the Merge Columns transform. It's not on this tab, so what I can do is look on the Transform tab, and there it is. It's greyed out at the moment for a good reason. It's also strangely on the Add Column tab. There it is. I always get the feeling with these transforms that Microsoft sprinkled them randomly across these tabs. The reason it was greyed out is because I didn't have 2 or more columns selected. Once I've done that and go back to the Transform tab, you can see I can merge the 2 columns together. When I click on this transform, it will ask me how I want to separate them. And I can click on a drop arrow and either choose a separator or type in a custom one. But actually, I don't want a separator. I want the 2 dates to go straight one after the other. And I'll call my new column End Date, because that's what it actually is. I've always managed to get the final date of the course, not the start date. If I then choose OK, it will combine the 2 columns into a single one, with a null value, a blank string between the 2 values, and effectively I've managed to extract the end date. What I can then do is change this into a date by going back to the Home tab, selecting the column and choosing a date as a format. And I've made a lot of progress because I've now got the date as a column. What I'll now do is show how to get the start date out, and to do that we're going to have to use the Advanced Editor. Before we extract the start date of each course from the information we've got, let's just have a quick look at the Advanced Editor. On the Home tab there's this tool, Advanced Editor, and I can click on that to show this rather scary dialog box. What this is a representation of what the query looks like when written in the Power Query language. More on this in a second. And basically this is just a programming language equivalent of the steps I've created on the right hand side. It looks terrifying. I don't know the language at all, so let's cancel out of it. And what we're going to do now is to create a custom column. To do that, we can go to the Add Column tab and we can click on the Add Custom Column tool. The idea behind this is I know the date the course ended and I know how long it lasted, and so I should be able to create the start date by taking the end date and subtracting from it the number of days minus 1. The minus 1 is because if a course, for example, finished on the 5th of June, then it began on the 4th of June. Subtracting 2 days from it would actually take me back to the 3rd of June, which is 1 day too far. So to create this custom column, I'll click on Add Custom Column, and I'll call my new column Start Date. I can click in the Custom Column formula, and this is a good time to buy your manual on how to write queries in Power Query. There's a link saying learn about Power Query formulas, and apart from the fact I think it should be formulae, being pedantic, if I click on that link it will take me to the website giving more information about this language. If I just scroll down here, you can see that the Power Query formula language is also informally known as M, which I quite like. And I quite also like the phrase it embeds M documents in Excel to enable repeatable mashup of data. So all the time you thought you were analysing data, you were just creating repeatable mashups of data. But enough of that. So you're really going to have to use either a textbook or help or Google or something like that to know what to type in here. I've already done that, and I know that if I type date.addDays and an open bracket, it will come up with a function which will allow me to add a number of days on to a given date. The first argument of this function is the end date one. So I can either double click on this or click on it once and choose the insert button, and it will backwards insert it into the formula. I can then put a comma in. You can see that it's expecting more information down here. So the comma takes me on to my second argument, which is the number of days I want to add. What I need to do this is to type in a negative sign because I want to take a minus figure for the days, and then I can double click on the days column. That will actually take me too far back in time, so what I need to do from that is add 1 onto that to take me to the right position. I can then put in the right parenthesis it's been demanding for so long, and no syntax errors have been detected. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, as we'll see in a second. If I now choose OK to confirm that, you can see it's given an error. And the reason for that is while the date is in date format, the number of days is not in a numerical one. So what I need to do is change the data type of this to a whole number. The error remains because my transforms are now in the wrong order. But what I can do is cleverly right click on this last one I've added and move it up the list of transforms. Because it now precedes the one which will set the start date, everything will work perfectly. I'll just move that start date before the end date because it seems to belong there to me. And what we'll now do is show how to number the rows before finally loading them into our spreadsheet. Just before we number the rows, or index them as it's called, a confession to make. In between the previous step and this one, I've actually changed the names of all my applied steps to make them easier to read and to emphasize the fact that you can do this. It was a bit strange because I found 3 steps which don't actually appear to do anything. They were called change type, but I hadn't the courage to delete them, so I just renamed them to say I wasn't sure if they were necessary. It turns out they're actually not. If I now delete each of these steps, a very dangerous thing to do because it may break the chain of consequences, it appears to me that they weren't doing anything. And just before I delete this final one, I could actually right click and choose to edit the settings, and I can't even find out what the step did, so I'll just get rid of it. The end result? I still end up with the same data, so it appears to me that Power Query is sometimes putting in extra steps which aren't needed, but possibly I've misunderstood that. So, on to indexing the rows. I can do this by clicking on the Add Column tab and choosing to add an index column. Now, I can either index from 0 or 1. I can even create what's called a custom index column, so I can say where I want to start. I could start at 37 and go up by 5 each time. But that doesn't seem sensible, so what I'm going to do is just click on the tool itself and it will automatically add the index column starting from 0. And I'm going to make that the first column. Now as it happens, I wanted them to start from 1. I could have done that by just choosing to begin from 1, but what I thought I'd do is show how you can easily add a value to every single row in a table. You can do that by going to the standard set of mathematical operations, and I can choose to add, multiply, divide or subtract. I'm going to add, and what I'm going to do is add 1 to each row. I can then choose OK, and what it'll do is add that. It's added it as an extra column. I didn't want that to happen, so what I'm going to have to do is rename that. So I'll call this row number, and I'll make that my first column again. And that completes everything. I can now load this data into Excel, so I can choose Close and Load, and it will replace any previous version of my data and give me the final version. There's a bit of a strange thing going on with the dates. For some reason it's formatted the end date but not the start date, so what I could do is just use the Format Painter to prove that the dates actually have come in okay. And that pretty much completes what I was trying to do. As a bonus, I'll now show how you can group and pivot data using Power Query. As a couple of bonus topics, what I'm now going to do is show how you can group data in Power Query and also how you can pivot columns. To do that, can I ask you first to double click on your query to edit it, and what we're going to do is take the start date column and change it to display just the month number. You can do this by going to the Transform tab on the ribbon, and on the Date tool change this to just show the month number as so. That will allow me to group and pivot data more sensibly. I'll close that down and load the data, which will refresh it eventually. And what I'm going to do now is to take a duplicate copy of this original query so that I can use the second one for grouping and aggregating. And I'll repeat that process to take another duplicate, and I'll use this one for pivoting. If we edit the second query, what I'm going to do is show how to group and aggregate data. If you've ever used a group by clause in SQL, or done subtotals in Excel, or done grouping and totaling queries in Access, you'll know what's coming up. The group by tool is in 2 different places, one on the Home tab and one again on the Transform tab. So we'll use the one on the Home tab for no particular reason, other than it's the first one I saw. If you click on the Group By tab, what it will do is ask you what column you want to group by. I'm going to do it by the start date, which is actually now the month number. And what I'm going to do is count how many rows there are for each month. The answer is not going to be terribly interesting. If I choose OK, you can see that it's showing me there's 1 row for every single month, because I haven't got terribly interesting data. And if I close that down and load the data, you can see it will refresh it to show my latest set of data. A typical use of this would be to show things like the average sales for each country or each group in a region. For pivoting, double click on your third query And initially what I'm going to do is get rid of the end date column because it's going to distort my pivot table. So I can do that by right-clicking on it and choosing remove. What I'm then going to do is to change the row number column so that it represents whether a number is odd or even, and this will give me something to aggregate by. To do that I can go to the Transform tab, and on the information drop down I'm going to say is it even or not, and it will give false or true according to whether the row number is odd or even. To create the pivot, you click on the column which you want to appear in the column headings at the top of what is essentially a pivot table. If I then click on Pivot Column, it will ask me what my values column is. I'm going to take the days as the value column, and I'm going to choose to sum the days together. It won't make a great deal of difference what I do, because there's only going to be one value for each pivot table cell. If I then choose OK, it will create my pivot. So for example, this number 2, which I'm clicking on, represents the fact that in August, month number 8, for ones where the row number is even, the total number of days was 2. And if that's not a useful statistic, I don't know what is. So I can close that down, and again it will refresh my data in my original Excel spreadsheet. If you like what you've seen and heard so far, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.